And this group actually has the highest average debt by age group. This comes from a video that I saw with the Money Guys show. They were going through different debt groups, and they were talking about how much each generation essentially had in debt. And I thought I would go ahead and take my own little spin on that viewpoint as well. So many of these numbers are inspired by their video. And if I can find the video again, I'll try to put it in the link down below. It might be hard to do though, because they have a really big channel with a lot of videos, but I will do my best to try to find that. All right, so starting off, before we even begin to look at some of these numbers, I want to let you know what we're talking about when we say debt. When we say debt, we're talking about every single debt. We're talking about medical, we're talking about housing, we're talking about credit cards, cars, everything, student loans, all the stuff. So when you consider these numbers here, that's what we're talking about. Also, these are averages. So averages are going to be numbers that are heavily skewed by people who are either debt-free or are racking up enormous amounts of debt. Those outliers will skew the number a little bit one way or the other. So when we consider averages, just understand that it is something that we have to take a little bit with a grain of salt, even though it might give us some truth to it. All right. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dig into these numbers here. So the first one is Generation Z. So we're talking about people in their 20s. And this group is holding down at about $34,328 in average debt. So when you consider Generation Z, we're talking about a generation here who probably has student loans, who may have some credit card debt and some car payments that they are making right now. But because they don't have a way necessarily to get into the housing market yet, due to the fact that they might be early on in their careers or still going through college, or simply can't afford a house right now due to the prices of houses, that is why this generation has a pretty low number than what maybe some of you may have expected from them. Although, to be fair, $34,000 isn't cheap when you're considering people who may not own a home and at best own maybe a car and student loan debts. That does seem like quite a bit of money for sure. So moving on to the next generation here. The next generation is the Millennials. So we're talking about people in their 30s through roughly the early 40s, I guess you could say. And this group has about $132,280 in debt. Now, this group, similar to Gen Z, they probably have student loans, they have car payments, they probably got some credit card debt, but they also are buying houses at this point. So that is why it is about an almost $100,000 increase in debt on average compared to the generation that we just talked about earlier. So this group has got the house now, although we're talking about some inflated housing prices, right? Because of the housing market continuing to go up. So it is a pretty big chunk of money. And again, these are averages. There's probably many millennials that might watch this video and say, mine's higher than that. But this is just an average. Okay, looking at the next group. And this group actually has the highest average debt out of all the generations that were listed. And that is Gen X, sitting at $158,105. So again, I'm not entirely sure why this would be the case. I have some guesses as to why. So it would be all the things before: the house, the car, the credit cards, the student loans. But in addition to all of that, I think that this generation may be holding on to student loans that don't actually belong to them, but belong to the generations after them, their kids. So this may be a generation that has many Parent Plus loans and things like that, where they are paying off some of the student loan debt of their children. That would be my best guess. If you have an idea, leave it in the comments below why you think that they may have a little bit higher of an amount. It could also be that they are upgrading the house too. These are probably people who are not first-time home buyers anymore, and they have upgraded to that much nicer house, and therefore they're paying a bit more on their house in order to get that nice house. So that could be another consideration too. All right, moving on to the next one. This is the baby boomers. The baby boomers are sitting at $92,619. So this group is obviously getting to that point where they're in retirement, almost at retirement, that sort of thing, and they are paying off their debts. Some of them may have a paid off house at this point, which significantly reduces the amount of debt that you have. But it is still surprising to have that much debt going into retirement, and that would seem a little bit scary to me. So I imagine that this is going to be still maybe some housing debt, maybe some car loans that they're still paying off, and those sorts of things. But yeah, that's a little bit concerning. If I were at that age with that amount of debt, I may be a little worried because, again, retirement, usually your income is a bit lower than what you were making in your working years. Okay, looking at the final group that we're going to look at here, and that is the silent generation. This group is sitting at $38,460. So again, this group has been thoroughly into retirement at this point. I imagine a lot of this debt is medical related. They probably have had their house either paid off, or maybe they have sold it and moved in with relatives or some other kind of situation. So I would imagine that a lot of the debt that we're looking at here is going to be more medical related compared to some of the other generations that we have looked at. But that number is starting to look a lot closer to those Gen Zers who are just starting their working years and just starting to accumulate debt. So you can kind of see that peak and valley. Gen Z, 38, working your way up to Gen X, and then you start weaving back down to the silent generation there. So I'm going to go ahead and let you know what our personal debt level is right now and how that stacks up with the other generations that we have looked at so far. So we have two debts that we're holding on to right now. The first one is my student loan debt, which currently sits at about $12,000. We are trying to pay that off as quickly as possible, and we have a video about that on my wife's channel where we talked about how we wanted to pay it off in a year. We're about halfway through that year, and we're about halfway through the debt. So fingers crossed we'll actually be able to achieve that goal. But right now it's $12,000. The other one is our mortgage on the house here, and currently that is $99,000. So if you put the two together, we're sitting at about $111,000 in debt right now, which I would say is not too bad for being in an age that is like, you know, late Gen Z, early millennial, in that weird group there. I'd say that we're doing pretty good with our debt level. We're not as high as the average for the millennials, but we also have more assets than the average Gen Zer right now who may not have a house, but has all these other debts that they have accumulated too. If you would like to share with me your debt level or how you stack up with your generation or the other generations that were mentioned, go ahead and let me know in the comments down below and we can talk about comparisons here.